All right, what's up, fellow base campers? I am working for the, I don't know, 10th, 20th time on trying to get the refrigerator to work properly. To pull this fridge out, it's very simple. When you open up the door, you're going to see these little black caps. There's one here, one here, one here, one here. Those caps will pop right off with your finger. Once you pop those caps off, you're going to see a screw behind each one of those. You just pull those out with a Phillips screwdriver. And then back behind the fridge, you got to pull the top and bottom vent covers off. Back behind the fridge will be a screw that holds it in right here. Once you take those 5 screws out, you're good. Here is where you make your connections for disconnecting and reconnecting the fridge. First, you want to take the propane off, which is right here. You can do that with a 3/4 inch standard wrench. Your DC connections are right back here. You can see the yellow, which is positive, the white, which is negative. And finally, especially when you're putting it back together, don't forget the AC cord. It's easy to remember when you take it out because you go, oh yeah, it popped right out when I'm pulling it out. But when you're plugging it back in, it can be a major pain if you dress everything in and you totally forget to plug it in. The outlet sits right on the other side of the outside wall right here. The problem with this Basecamp is ventilation is very poor. So there's an intake that's down on the bottom, and then there's an exhaust that's up on the top. I've done some modifications here that I'll walk you through here in just a second. But long story short, the biggest issue is you have this here, this intake. This is where the cold air or the outside air comes in. The goal is it hits the back of this refrigerator unit. The key is it has to hit these coils. These coils right up here, this is what makes or break it. And then that heat escapes and goes out the top. The problem is, as you guys know with the propane cover, the gap is like this big from these 2 panels. Number 2, the intake and the exhaust are way too close together. They're about a foot, according to the factory specifications for the refrigerator, they're about a foot too short. So it's a clear mechanical defect from Airstream. What they've done to try to compensate for that shortcoming is they'll put a little fan right here that helps kind of blow some air up toward that coil, and then they'll put an exhaust fan that's really noisy right back here. The problem is that's still not good enough. So what I've done is I've created this little duct chamber, and what it does is there's too much space behind the fridge and that back wall. The manufacturer of the fridge says there should be no more than 1 inch. Well, because the front of the Airstream curves, there's some parts where it's 2 or 3 inches, which is too much. I verified at the factory. They said, oh yes, way too much. So what I've done is I've made a little chimney. The goal is when the fridge goes back to the back, there is just under 1 inch between that back sheet metal and the back of the fridge. And I made this chimney. Think of it as a chimney like in your fireplace. There's the very bottom. And then now this section here is right up against the fridge, and there's a little tiny crack where the hot air can escape, but it can only escape after it passes through these fins. Make sure that you have this modification. 2017, a lot of them did not. If you didn't, give the factory your serial number, and they will give you, they should be able to issue you one of these. You're gonna need this shroud. But that's it. I'll show you the outside, and then we'll see if this makes a difference. Here is the outside view. As I talked about inside, you can see how you have a clear intake right here. And then on the exhaust, you can see how I've put some sheet metal. This is a pretty hack job, I admit, but I've tried so many different variations of this. I'm tired of pretty. My first one was pretty, and now I'm like running a laboratory. I'm just trying to figure out what makes it work in the end. But I'm hoping with having all this together, it's gonna work. All right, here is the exhaust vent, and I want to show you what I did back behind here. Notice that this is the vent the way that it sits in the camper. But if you look, I've kind of off-centered it a bit. I've pushed these fans so that they are pushing a little bit more this way. I did this because if you look at the exhaust cover, the fins that are on the back of the fridge, they're a little bit more off-center. So I wanted to make sure that I'm getting maximum airflow from those fins right into here. although you got that heat exhaust stack in the back of the fridge that sits here, that heat's going to find its way through this air pressure to push on out these vents. But I really want to make sure that center airflow is going right through that chimney, through those fins, and right out that exhaust. Also, what I've done is I blocked with, you can buy this at any hardware store, it's just aluminum tape. It's aluminum foil, so to speak, on one side, and it's a sticky adhesive on the other. And what I've done is I put this, it looks like a little astronaut cave. I blocked all the vents that the fan doesn't directly hit. Notice at the top, I've got all these vented off here. I've covered up just a little bit of the sides. And I've also put a seal back on the bottom side of it as well. And I've done that because you don't want to have that short cycling activity happening, meaning if these fans are running, they're running like this, and air's coming from the back of the fridge and going out the exhaust. If you don't cover these up, what'll happen is the air pressure is so strong, you'll get some stray air coming in here and going right back into here. Or what'll happen is you'll get hot air that's from the fridge coming out, and then it gets sucked right back in the corner and goes right back in here and just does a hot loop like this. Meanwhile, that hot air, when it's looping, hits those fins, makes the temperature go even higher. So you need to do all you can to force the air to come up from the bottom vents, which are totally open. There's no fans on those bottom vents at all. And then I've got 3 of these fans here that I'll put a link up to, and I've got a little short connection here that I tie it into the fridge. That way I can remove this cover if I ever want to service it, and I just pop it off with a connector here. I've got all these tied to a thermostat, so when it gets above 90 degrees on those fins, those fans come on. Below 90, fans go off, and it's quiet. We'll see how it goes. But I have everything connected now, so my last and final step is just to pop the covers on and see how it works. All right, fellow base campers, so this is the next day. I've made a modification because I left this off all day today. The whole day this was off. The outside ambient temperature only got to 75 degrees. And there's, as we talked about, that's the exhaust, and then the intake is down there. Even at 75 degrees ambient temperature, I had the temperature climb up to 40, which that's pretty unusual. Here's what I suspect is happening. The ambient temperature was 75, it climbed to 40 only because I now have such good circulation coming in and out. It's coming in at the intake, it runs through that tight chimney where it's very tight. See how this curves right here? With that chimney, I don't have that curve. It's a very tight, less than 1 inch back to the fins at the top, and then it goes out the exhaust. I think what was happening with this cover off, it was short circuiting, meaning the outside air goes out and it gets picked right back up here. That's short circuiting in the air conditioning heating world. That term is common. That means that it's just going in an endless loop. And so what I've done as an experiment, I'll make it look pretty later if this works. I went to the hardware store and I bought a noodle like you use for a swimming pool. The noodle's the perfect diameter. I mean, this thing is tight back here. I mean, tight. So now what's happening is the exhaust comes out. It's forced to go only up, or maybe it comes out the side and goes out. It can't come down here and get sucked back in because I have this noodle in a U-shaped. It looks like there's a crack right here, but there's not really. That's actually a label on the noodle. So it's very tight right here. Like, it is tight, 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 tight. It's watertight. If water hit this, it would even come into that bottom because it just runs off that noodle and it's done. So now what's happening is all the heat is forced to come out the top. And what I'm noticing is down below, if I stick my hand down here, on the other side of this blue noodle, I can actually feel the air that's being sucked in. Airstream did not drill this top case very tight, because if you look on this side, you can see I've got kind of a gap in here. But it's leaning up against here, and it's right up against the frame here, so there's very little air that could short cycle from the output here back into here. Very little. But in my final permanent installation, I'll buy black foam. I'll get it so tight that you can't fit anything in there. And again, I'll do that U-shaped. I'm hoping now, the beauty is cold air that comes in only has one place to come in, down below. So it's gonna come from the lower part. You know, remember, hot air rises, cold air falls. So the cold air is always gonna be Down here, it's going to get sucked up in between both sides of the noodle, comes into the intake, hits my modifications, comes out, hits the exhaust, only has one place to go. I'm liking that this is potentially going to work because I do like what they do on the front of this. It's just, there's not a lot of air room. But I do think with this modified fan chamber, that air is probably, it's not ideal, but it's sufficient. So tomorrow it's supposed to hit 90. We'll see what happens. All right, I've got everything back together again. Here's the final mod that I did. I grabbed some sheet metal and I fabricated a little plate, and I've got some little fans that I bought on Amazon, drilled, I think those are 3.5-inch holes, but drilled to whatever the size of your fan that you purchase is. And I got this where it is using adhesive, the really strong double-sided adhesive up on the top of the fridge. But it gives it a nice, clean factory look. And instead of using a little circulating fan like this that runs out of batteries, I know mine sometimes in the middle of the night it'd vibrate up against food and get real annoying and I have to kind of move the fan around. This guy is super quiet. And the nice thing is by having this on all the time, I have it tied to that same thermostat that turns on the back fans. Logic being, hey, if it's hot enough where those back fans need to kick on, these guys should probably kick on too. And what it does is it constantly just circulates that air inside the fridge. I personally think these things are overrated. It definitely helps. You'll see some YouTube videos where people will say, hey, buy the little clip-on alligator clip accessory and all your problems are gone. I think they've tested it for a half day in cool weather and they think it's great. And then it hits 90 and they're right back to the drawing board. But the combination of the changes I made that I just showed you, as well as this, we'll see what happens. I got my little thermostat in here. Right now it's saying it's 74.8 for my, and I've reset the counter, and we'll see what happens here.